Hi, and thanks for joining us. The Justice Department has charged former Cuban President Raúl Castro in the latest point of pressure on the island nation. 94-year-old Castro faces multiple counts of murder and conspiracy to kill U.S. citizens over the 1996 downing of 2 civilian planes by the Cuban military. 5 others were also charged in connection with the attack. The indictment comes amid high tensions between the U.S. and Cuba. Earlier, President Trump was asked about the country's fate.
It's a failing nation. You see that it's falling apart. They have no food. They have no electricity. They have no energy at all. But they do have great people. There are a lot of great people.
In response to the indictment, the Cuban government said, quote, Cuba condemns the despicable accusation against the leader of the revolution, adding the United States government lacks the legitimacy and jurisdiction to carry out this action. It's unclear how and when Castro will face these new charges. Cuba does not extradite people to the U.S. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche was asked about that today.
We indict men outside of this country all the time. And there's all kinds of different ways that we get them here. The reason why we indict somebody is because we want them here to face justice in front of a jury of their peers. How we go about doing that obviously depends on the circumstances in the case, and I'm not going to go beyond that.
The White House's renewed focus on Cuba comes as President Trump is dealing with the unresolved war with Iran, which, of course, has triggered high gas prices across the country. CBS News Intelligence National Security reporter Olivia Gazis joins us now. Olivia, thank you so much for being here. What more do we know about the administration's plans for Cuba?
Sure, Lindsay. Well, all signs right now point to sustained pressure on multiple fronts: economic, political, legal, military, diplomatic. Virtually all of those intensified in just the past week. We have seen 2 rounds of sanctions, one targeting Gaesa, the Cuban military entity that controls most of Cuba's economy, another one hitting Cuban military and intelligence agencies and their leadership. The Secretary of State today addressed the Cuban people in Spanish for the first time, telling them that their government is the reason they have no fuel, no food, no electricity. And also today, as you mentioned, that big federal indictment of Raúl Castro and his 5 associates. All of that is against this backdrop of quiet but now increasingly visible diplomacy that we know has been going on. State Department officials have been engaging Cuban counterparts for months. Last Friday, CIA Director John Ratcliffe traveled to Havana to deliver this personal message from President Trump that the U.S. is open to engagement, but only if the Cuban government makes fundamental changes and only for a limited time. That runway is an indefinite, and there's also this dangle of $100 million in humanitarian aid that remains on the table as a sweetener. So there's enormous churn. There's also these very loud expressions of defiance from Cuban officials who insist that they pose no military threat to the U.S. So the question is whether the leadership can survive this pressure, or if they decide that the combination of all of it is too much and forces a change.
Let's go ahead and listen to what President Trump said about the war with Iran today during a commencement address at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy.
Everything's gone. Their Navy's gone. Their Air Force is gone. Just about everything. The only question is, do we go and finish it up, or are they going to be signing a document? Let's see what happens.
So we're talking about this intensified pressure on Cuba. All the while, we still have this conflict with Iran. Where do we go from here?
For sure. Well, the president seemed today to relegate it to 2 options: a diplomatic outcome or the renewal of military strikes. And we seem to have lurched between those possibilities for the past 2 weeks as well. The president had announced the suspension of an operation to run ships through the Strait of Hormuz, only to give more room for negotiations. That was last week. This week, we have heard the same, that Gulf allies have intervened to ask for an additional few days of negotiations. And that's the decision the president is going to be faced with, whether to renew those military strikes if a framework deal doesn't come through.
Olivia Gazis, thank you so much.